Bienvenidos! In today's lesson with Spanish con Señora Bisbee, we're going to talk about some special verbs that change their meaning in the past. So when you use them in the preterite, their meaning actually slightly alters, so it's not the typical meaning that you think you're using. So let's take a look. Okay, so Spanish has two past tenses. You might have only worked with the preterite so far, that's okay. Just be aware that there are two past tenses, the preterite and the imperfect. In general, the imperfect is used to express states, so things that represent states. By that I mean like a physical, mental state, that sort of state. Preter, on the other hand, is action, so it's used to progress whatever's happening, whereas the imperfect more or less describes the scene, if you will. So with certain verbs here in this list, for example, we're taking something that in the imperfect would express a state and instead making it an action by using the preterite. So querer, for example, to want, in the imperfect tense would be wanted. But when we put it in the preterite tense, if we use it positively, so it's an affirmative, it means tried, versus as a negative, it means refused. Poder was able in the imperfect, but in the preterite, if it's positive, it means managed. If it's negative, it means someone tried something, but they failed. Saber would be knew in the imperfect, but when we use it in the preterite, it means found out or realized. Conocer also means knew in the imperfect. Remember, these two verbs are both to know, but in the different situations. In the preterite, means met or became acquainted with. Estar was in the imperfect. Remember, it's used for things in the acronym place. But for the preterite, it's more like arrived, so it's in that specific moment. Tener, had or possessed if you use it in the imperfect, but if it's in the preterite, it means got or received. Now what about its special expression, tener que, to have to do something? Well, if you use that expression in the preterite, you're saying that they had to do something, but they also did it, like it's done. So had to and did it. Something you might have picked up on too with this list is not only do these verbs have a slightly different meaning when you use them in the preterite that we need to be aware of, but these are all irregular verbs in the preterite as well. So when we spell them, they have funky changes to their stems. For example, querer, their new stem was quis. So if you said, yo quise hacer mi tarea, it would be like saying, I tried to do my homework. So just be aware, again, with these versions in the preterite, you're expressing an action for these verbs now, as opposed to a state. So here I've got some side-by-side examples to show you what I mean. So the sentences are the exact same except for the conjugations. So on the left-hand side, I've got all preterite conjugations. On the right-hand side, I've got imperfect. If you haven't learned the imperfect tense so far, no big deal. Just take a look at the preterite ones on the left. So if I say, quiso invitarme a un café, that's like saying he or she tried to invite me to a cafe. Versus in the imperfect, he or she wanted to invite me to a cafe. Supo que no había otro remedio, sabía que no había otro remedio. So he or she found out that there wasn't another remedy, so any other remedy, versus he or she knew that there wasn't any other remedy. Pudo alcanzar la rama más alta, podía alcanzar la rama más alta. So in the preterite version, it's like saying he or she managed to reach the highest branch, versus he or she was able to reach the highest branch. Tuvo varias cartas, he or she received various letters. Tenía varias cartas, he or she had, like possessed, various letters. Estuvo en el trabajo a las 8 versus estaba en el trabajo a las 8. So this is like saying he or she arrived at work at 8 versus he or she just was at work at 8. So you can see with these examples especially, the subtle differences that using the preterite of these verbs does to these sentences. So just keep that in mind. When you see these verbs, you need to recognize, oh, the meanings are not what I'm used to. They've changed slightly because now they're actions versus states. That's not to say that it's impossible to use these in the preterite and not express a state. You just have to add other terms to it to express that that's what you mean. So things that are limiting of time, for example, such as, a noche, giving a duration of time, things like that. So it's not impossible to use the preterite to express a state with these verbs. It's just that we need to be aware that they also can change their meaning. All right, and that's all there is to it. That's our short list of verbs we need to be aware of, that if we use them in the preterite, their meaning is going to alter slightly, because instead of being perceived as a state, like they would in the imperfect, in the preterite they become an action, and therefore their meanings change slightly. It just comes down to memorization, recognition that these verbs mean something different in the preterite tense, and it's also a bit of memorization because they're all regular too. So if you need to refresh on their irregular conjugations, check out our other video here that will go over how to conjugate them in the preterite. Gracias, nos vemos y buena suerte.